In the next hour, we will explore what is integrity and why is it relevant for prevention of corruption. How are public integrity and public trust correlated? What roles do international and national anti-corruption bodies play in the fight against corruption? And how and whether NGOs and the private sector can assist them in this fight against corruption. Hopefully we will also hear some good initiatives and good practices that we can all learn from. And let me start with you, Mr. Schumi. Before we start, of course, we have to understand what we are talking about when we talk about integrity. This is the main word here today during this conference. It seems that the notion of integrity is sometimes difficult to grasp onto, at least by some of the people. So I would like to ask you, what is integrity and why is strengthening integrity so important for preventing corruption?
Yes. One of the simplest explanations of integrity is that it's accordance between what one thinks, believes, speaks, how she behaves. So it's very simple to see one person if he's in accordance with himself. So if we believe that our politicians and leaders and all persons at the okay, yeah. If persons at the positions have trust, then of course we believe in their actions. We check them through daily actions if they are with highest level of integrity. What's important, we trust them. So integrity is a precondition of trust. So that's the important message. If we then combine integrity with corruption, so we can see that it's a so-called immunity shield against corruption. And when we have persons with honor, persons who we trust at the positions, everything goes better. And therefore, we believe that society has to start at the beginning with kids and so on, but we'll speak about it later on.
Thank you. So, in short, if you say that you have the integrity, you need also to walk the talk, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Ms. Ferreira Rubio, for decades we have international anti-corruption legal framework in place, which provides us for various rules related to criminalizing corrupt practices, preventing conflict of interest, gifts giving and taking, and that call upon the countries to integrate these anti-corruption tools into their national legal and institutional framework. And actually the countries have done so, right? We have all, on the other hand, been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We see wars around the world and even in the neighboring countries. The climate change has affected almost every country in the world, we can say. It hasn't spared us. Governments are required to work in this context of multiple crises. And for this, it seems that they are not properly equipped for. Corruption scandals related to emergency situations show that even in such urgent situations, top-level public officials seem to forget about their pledges to demonstrate their integrity when they are in office. And the OECD Trust Survey showed that on average, only 4 out of 10 people in OECD member states expressed confidence in their governments. So despite constantly emphasizing efforts that have been made to strengthen integrity among top public office holders, the public seems to be unconvinced. Ms. Ferreira Rubio, what in your opinion should be done that the trust of the public is rebuilt?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. And of course, there are lots of surveys that show not only the OECD survey on trust, that people don't trust in politicians in particular and public institutions. And this has to do, of course, with the scandals. In order to build reputation and trust, it takes a long time, but it is enough to have one scandal to destroy that confidence of the people. So that's one thing that we have to take into account. And you mentioned, Vita, the COVID emergency. And around the world, even in the very well-established and old democracies in the northern countries, we had lots of scandals from day one related to public procurement for the response to COVID. The conflicts of interest that we have seen, researched, and revealed from Transparency International and the chapters is immense. And then we have another thing that was not so visible in the years before, which is that corruption is not only spending wrongly the public resources, but also not being consistent in how you behave. And what we saw were the party gates. You remember the Downing Street 10, but we have these kinds of parties in many democracies. So those who impose on us the restrictions don't apply the restrictions for themselves. And that was really something very visible because we were in our homes, secluded, while we see the pictures and the films and the videos. So that was enraging people, creating outrage. And the other thing that came in a succession was the problems with vaccination. Both the contracts about buying the vaccines and the lack of transparency there, and the access to vaccine, the privilege access. So we have lots of things to do in order to rebuild trust. A strong public integrity system. You mentioned some things, but rules and laws are not enough. You have to lead by example. You have to show. And you have to guarantee that there are consequences. So if you don't comply, if you know, as a public official, you do not abide by the laws, you will be punished. In an appropriate time, not 20 years after you left office. So punishment and the stop of impunity should be concurrent with the violation of the rules. That will give a message to the public. And of course, we have to work on education, and we will have time to talk about that. Private sector integrity also. We have to work with the private sector. This is a tango. You need two to tango. And you have to create the incentives for public officials to act properly, but also to work with the private sector. And there are many persons in the private sector around the world that I have met in my activity willing to collaborate. So it's a collective action way of working, and we can improve the situation. And once we have all this in place, probably if we keep on behaving properly, we will restore trust.
So, Mr. Basio Terracino, for decades, various international anti-corruption mechanisms strive to ensure that obligations that are set in the international legal framework against corruption, which states have agreed to, are met. However, it seems that those mechanisms are sometimes toothless. And traditional responses to fighting corruption based on creating even more rules, overly rigid compliance regimes, and the tougher enforcement seem to have been of limited effectiveness. And the new topic now on the agenda is the public integrity and how to cultivate it across the whole of society. Strengthening public integrity is recognized now as a strategic and sustainable approach to corruption. Also, the focus regarding public integrity strategies have been changed, shifting it from ad hoc integrity policies to a context-dependent, behavioral, risk-based approach. So, Mr. Basio Terracino, what are the reasons for the states failing to comply with international obligations, and what more should be done to revive pledges that they have given to the public and the people?
Thank you. This is a very, very interesting question to ask me, and perhaps also Greco and other mechanisms that for decades are doing this work. Perhaps on the fact, I would agree that many of these mechanisms could be considered toothless, but we should remember why. At the end of the day, is the way the world works, I would say, is based on state sovereignty. So every country is sovereign and doesn't want to be told by another country what they need to do. So I'm oversimplifying, but this is the principle behind the system. We have the global system. Therefore, these mechanisms are, they don't bite as much as we would think. But even if you have, and here I'm thinking of, forget about the area of corruption, even other areas like genocide or crimes against humanity, we do have a court that is bites quite a lot, and still there we could discuss about the effectiveness of it. So I think there's a real and physical, perhaps even limitation on how much we can do internationally, or how much pressure internationally can be put on a country to do what they should do. However, I would say these mechanisms sometimes do produce change. I admit they are perhaps slow and not even, so change quickly and then suddenly stops. And one of the success comes from the OECD Working Group on Bribery, which is we have this body that was created 25 years ago, next year. And it has changed the way we do business, at least in some parts of the world, not in the whole world. But it has changed the way we approach bribes, international bribes, and trade, etc. Not the full solution, I admit it, but it has served to criminalize things that we were not criminalizing before, etc. I admit, too slow, much slower than what we want and what citizens may want. But I would just say that the real change and the long-term and more structural comes from within. It cannot come from outside, it cannot come from abroad, and from within, it means many things. It means civil society, to have the civic space, to have a vibrant civil society, but also from within, and especially, I would say, from people like you, from entities or government that individually, as a person, you want to do the right thing for your country and for your government. I think we usually forget about these people. They are the ones, and yourselves, that push this agenda against a lot of obstacles that are put in front of you, I'm sure, every day. This is the real change that will not come now. And with this, I finish going back to the international mechanisms. The international mechanisms can support these people through networks, through organizations like the OECD, the UN, and others that will help with tools, with sharing experiences, or even moral support when your job is just too tough.
Thank you. It's interesting to say that, yes, it comes from within, not from the international organization and such, but there should be the political will in the top level public officials who have to respond to calls made upon them by the international bodies. Mr. Marcella, being a Greco member state brings certain obligations to be met. But after monitoring how successful Greco's member states are in implementing its recommendations to strengthen corruption prevention and integrity among top-level public officials, Greco had to call upon several member states, even the ones with high CPI, to step up in the fight against corruption. However, reactions from these states, from these top-level public officials in the recent years have not been always what we expected. Even more, they sometimes went quite the opposite direction, towards seriously eroding the standards of the Council of Europe in protection of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Why, in your opinion, do we encounter such responses to Greco calls coming from the top-level public officials?
How much time do I have for this? Well, as I said, we have 48 member states. There are 48 different members of the top executive functions. Some of them are, you know, very bright, willing to do something. Some of them are not. Both of them. Both sides, you know. So, but as Americans would say, let's cut the chase. Everything depends on the political will, and everything depends whether people would like to make a change or not. The people from the countries who are very high on the corruption perception, some of the countries, not all of them, some of the countries, I would say 2 of them, but I will not mention who they are. Because I think naming and shaming is not. They think that they are the best. You know, we are the happiest nation in the world. We don't have to change anything. So we will not introduce the rules that you are recommending to us because we don't need that. All the others introduce that, but not that country, specific one. They don't want to introduce that because it's, by the way, it's an OECD country. So we don't need that. So despite of the, and now you have to have in mind how this attitude is reflected to the other countries. For instance, that country received regularly 4 or 5 recommendations. And the other countries received 30, right? So the other country is, you know, implementing 20 recommendations, still 10 pending, and we still think they are not good. But that country is, you know, partly implementing 3, 1 is not implementing, and 1 is implementing. And then this is good result. Of course, it's a not good result. And that comes to that issue of the leading by example. We need examples which are good, like, for instance, Iceland and Norway. You know, what they say. When we discuss the report, they say, okay, we don't think that this recommendation is needed for us because we have to, you know, the practice that is good, but we understand that the Greco's rule is you need the black letter law and you need the practice. So we will implement that. Finland, for instance, when we have transparency of political party funding, they didn't have any rules about that when we started. They received, I think, 13 and 14 recommendations for Finland, which is, you know, almost outrage. They implement everything in the 13 months. No question asked. You know, other country for the same region received less, but they are reluctant because their system is functioning. So it's a, you know, it's a, the main challenge is how to persuade people in the top executive functions that what they are doing is not for them, but because of the people. And the people can trust them only if they behave in such a way to deserve trust. Okay, I'll stop here because I will have some more time later on, right?
I think that Greco's work is also very useful beyond Europe. And you mentioned something in that way in your presentation, Marin, and I want to highlight that because we do not receive recommendations, but we read the recommendations. And you have a very interesting thing, which is monitoring the implementation of the recommendation, which is lacking officially in UNCAC, for instance, the anti-corruption. We have in the Americas a mechanism for our Americas anti-corruption treaty. But this monitoring is good because you come to the countries, ask the questions, and then says, okay, we have been told this is partially complete or not. And the rest of the world interested in creating a culture of integrity, we are following the recommendations. So beyond the non-compliance or the very good countries that don't need you to recommend anything, the other countries of the world are using your work. So thank you for that.
May I just thank you for that. I really appreciate that because when I'm speaking to Greco, it often sounds like I'm bragging, which of course someone will say you are entitled because you have a good results. But our results are in our reports, which is, as I mentioned, fact-based report, regardless of the political situation in that country. And therefore, I'm really urging, if you want to do the survey, you will have a factual situation in each country of 48 member states of the Greco. Our website is open, our reports are open, we are following the compliance procedure, we are peer pressuring the countries to do that, we are even have an ad hoc procedure if something is really not good, and we have a high-level visit to the country. And if I may just, we have 2 high-level visits, which I was there, to talk to the people how to implement the recommendations. So we went to the OECD member state with the happiest people in the world. We have the conversation with the ministers, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Then we have a high-level visit in Cyprus, because the Supreme Court in Cyprus was reluctant to introduce the code of ethics, right? So I went there with the executive secretary, and the executive secretary, who is not executive secretary anymore, but that's not because of that, he said, Marin, you should talk with them because you are a judge. They will listen to you. So he went out of the room, and I talked to them, all 7 of them, and we find the agreement very fast. Actually, the solution how to do that, and that was, this is one of the issues that, and one of the, I would say, thing that I'm very happy and I'm very proud of that. I didn't have to persuade them, we just talked like colleagues, which I cannot do with the Ministry of the Justice, because he's I cannot do it with the President of the Parliament. In Croatia, we still didn't, our parliamentarians do not have a code of conduct. Like this is nuclear science, right? The recommendations is 10 years old. And I really don't see why. I mean, it's not about behaving into the, parliament. It could be, but it's not. It's actually a conflict of interest, what to do in the specific situations. What if you come to Slovenia and someone offers you a lunch? How you will respond to that? What you will do? What with the protocolatorial gifts? What is not? What about the lobbyists? We will talk about that probably, with the people who try to influence. Why do I have to report that I have a meeting with the president of the electricity company? Why? I am a member of the parliament. I don't have to report to anyone anything. Wrong. You are not there because you are so important and so powerful. You are there because you are elected to serve your country or to serve the voters. That's the message that should be repeated as a parrot, every day. But the people, as soon as you get power, people changed, right? And that is the issue. That's why we need what I said, training and education. Education about corruption starts in the kindergarten and in the family. This is what I'm always saying, so I had to say it again.
Thank you. That brings us actually back to the political will that you mentioned in your speech and also at the beginning. And the political will is not something that you need only to comply with integrity standards. It's also needed to set up appropriate legal and institutional framework. And one of the UNCAC requirements is to have in place anti-corruption body or bodies that are in charge of preventive measures and policies. And this body should be granted sufficient independence to ensure that it can do its job unimpeded by undue influences, and should be provided with adequate resourcing and training. And we have the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption in Slovenia, going soon to be 20 years old next year. So it has almost 20 years of experience in the fight against corruption, and its central role, due to its position, powers, and recognized expertise in the Slovenian system of prevention of corruption, has been highlighted several times, even by international anti-corruption monitoring bodies. However, despite its role in cultivating the culture of integrity and ensuring accountability of public officials, such bodies sometimes face difficulties. They face attempts from people in power to weaken them or even to shut them down. Mr. Šumi, what measures can be taken to ensure that the independence and effectiveness of anti-corruption bodies in democracies are striving?
It's not enough just to have prescribed by the law that we have independent agency. What's more important is how it goes in reality, and first of all, it's very important that you have guaranteed independent funding, so that you're not depending, but at the end you are depending to the parliament who gives you money. And it puts you in non-pleasant situation when you have to each year ask for the money you need for your work. So at first I would like to stress independent funding. The second is independent workforce. It's very important that you are in position to appoint or to promote by your own decision, not by political or some other influence. What else? It's very important that you have a clear legal framework without gaps. And we considered it in Slovenia that we have some gaps, and they needed to be addressed by the change of law. But it's another question. And last but not least, it's very important what we see day by day, that everything what we do, all our decisions and all our recommendations, they needed to be by government and by state authorities taken seriously. It's very hard to send one by another recommendation and you have no answer. And what we'd like to do is that we put in that it would be in law as obligation that each and every recommendation has to be applied in some way, so that if you refuse, for example, if you reject, you need to provide proper reasoning. So I believe that this is the most important pillars which guarantee that independent state body as anti-corruption agency in Slovenia can work efficiently.
Thank you. So when the top level officials say, well, we have the political will, we will support you, but at the same time, in practice, they don't do so, it actually is again a question of integrity. It's
the same as Marin explained, it's as well a matter of culture. So if you have such kind of agency, it's a question, do you have it because you need it or because you have to have it? And I'm afraid that we do not have an answer yet in our society.
And one important point is to get the support of civil society.
It's very important.
Because I have seen around the world many occasions where the executive, particularly comes from the executive, is trying to cut off, to stop, to destroy the work or even the commission itself. And it is civil society that comes in support, in defending the commission. Of course, in order to get that, you have to have a reputable commission with independence and a good record and a good reputation. But this contact with civil society, I had found in very concrete situations, and I will not mention countries, as you say, where it was civil society taking on the streets to defend anti-corruption commissions.
Yes, and besides civil society, media as well are very important. And in 20 years of existence, we have some issues with what you mentioned, yes. Yeah.
Ms. Ferreira Rubio, it seems that you are looking at my notes because you were a little bit ahead with your comment. What I wanted to mention now is partnering with stakeholders outside of government. This should also be recognized as an essential element of taking an evidence-based, holistic and global approach to anti-corruption. And this is something also that UNCAC specifically mentions, right? Civil society organizations, NGOs and community-based organizations should be given an opportunity to actively participate in the prevention of and in the fight against corruption and to raise public awareness about this phenomenon. However, at the same time, then we are facing individuals and activists who investigate and expose corruption and who suffer, even by being killed. We see NGOs who are obstructed in their endeavors to obtain information in order that they provide informed and independent opinions about government's performance in anti-corruption and strengthening integrity. So what are the most common challenges faced by civil society organizations in promoting public integrity, and how can these challenges be overcome?
Mm-hmm. In the moment, what we are very worried about around the world as a global trend is the shrinking civil space, or the shrinking space for every civic or citizen activity. Organized civil society or just citizens. Through what? Through the passing of legislation that restricts the possibilities of working, through the attacks of very elementary rights in terms of democracy, like the freedom of speech and expression, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of association. There are some laws that are being popularized through authoritarian or elected authoritarian regimes trying to restrict the possibility of action of civil society or the possibility to receive resources to do our work. So this shrinking space for civil society is really worrying and concerning. The second thing that we are seeing, apart from the individual attacks, and as you mentioned, some activists or journalists working with us, we as Transparency International work together with the consortium of investigative journalists and with the OCCRP on organized crime. So we are very close with the investigative journalists as partners, and they are being attacked very seriously. We have had many cases of people dead because the investigations they were doing on corruption cases. But apart from that individual attacks, what we are facing now repeatedly is the appearance of SLAPs. SLAPs are strategic lawsuits against public participation. And they are, so you say something, you mention a company in a report on, for instance, it happened with the vaccines, the COVID vaccines, and who allows us to know or answer the access to information petition and who not. And we immediately face someone very powerful, particularly in the UK, for instance, with jurisdiction around the world, trying to initiate a defamation case. And for a civil society organization or a single individual, you can imagine what that means. So that's very costly, of course, and also in terms of facing the future of being in court for a long time on this. So these slabs that are becoming very popular are one problem that we should try to solve, and probably some legislation would be helpful in that sense. And the other thing that we face problems with is the access to information, which is a very simple and very original ask from Transparency International and other civil society organizations. Information should be public by default. And in some cases and some countries, we are still in the position where we have to present a paper, sign, explaining why we want this or that. And we were talking before about the decision of the Justice Court of Europe, which was really a slap on our faces, saying that the information about beneficial ownership is privacy, and you do not have a right to access that. Well, that came from the very top judiciary of the European Union and was against access to information. So I think the solutions are very simple. Respect the rights, allowed for the participation of civil society and citizens in general, and be transparent and accountable, as Marian mentioned in his speech.
Mr. Marcello, you actually, yes, in your speech, you actually mentioned that fighting corruption does not necessarily require highly innovative solutions. However, it requires constant political commitment, a shared culture of integrity, transparency, and accountability. Greco, as the Council of Europe's anti-corruption monitoring body, has limited tools at hand to enforce its recommendations. So what role does Greco play in assessing and monitoring the integrity of public institutions in democracies, and what are the main challenges faced in this regard?
As you know, we are covering 48 member states. There are 48 different systems. Trying not to repeat the political will, but you know, when you, we have, I would say, in a broader sense, three types of the recommendations. One is a hard one, another one is a mild one, and the third one is something in between. 13 countries, Greco members changed the constitution because of the Greco recommendations. So imagine how hard is that. That is very hard. On the other hand, you have the recommendation, do the training and the awareness issues, which is, you know, although I would like to be on the training of the ministers and the prime ministers and the government when they're doing training on the conflict of interest, you know, or the gifts. Yeah, well, if you know the place, you know that someone will. So these are so-called light ones, right? But when we are doing our assessment, we encounter different systems and the situations that you or I could not even imagine that would happen. And that's why the things are, you know, important, and the people who are sitting there are professionals. And they will listen to the others, how the situation, how that situation is solved in the other country. That's why I said you don't have to invent the hot water again. It's already there. You have to have just research and adapt the system that it has. However, there are some, I would say 3 examples, if I may say, regarding the judiciary that stuns me. If you divide Europe in half, from north to, to the south, on the left side, I intentionally didn't have say on the west side. On the left side, you have a countries when the people, when the judges can be members of political party. Okay, they do not interact. On the right side, for the obvious reasons, there are rules you don't have. You are banned from And then you encounter the country where the judge can be simultaneously a member of parliament. Right? Okay, it never happened 50 years, but it is in the law. So, of course, we issue the recommendations. It's the Netherlands. And, of course, they will immediately dare to change it's a long process, right? That needs time. You have to persuade parliamentarians why that is not good, although all the judges know why is that not good. But it's a process. Another example is where the judges are elected in the parliament. And when they are elected in the parliament, they have to pay a fee to the political party who voted for them. So what do you say about that system? How do you like it? Can you imagine that in Slovenia? Poland? Croatia? And that is a Switzerland. And of course, Switzerland is confederacy. And they have this system of direct democracy. And everything needs to be put on the referendum, right? That's why the woman gained the right to vote in 1974 in Switzerland. So, and it's very hard to do that. And then you have 2 states where the judge can be simultaneously a mayor of the city. So imagine you are judging Kranj and mayor of Ptuj. Italy and Austria. That is a possibility there. So we issued the recommendation, of course. I said one of the countries changed that and fulfilled the recommendation, and another one did not yet. So try to guess which one implemented, just to see whether your minds are working as a prejudice. Italy fulfilled the recommendation, but Austria did not yet, I would say. Because of the consultations, because of the parliamentarians, because of how you will present, that Austria belongs to they are a strong supporter of the main German rule principle, I would say, which says trust is okay, but control is even better, right? Which I think is actually a good principle for integrity, right? I think we should all apply that. We should trust them on the first side, but there is a need for the checks and balances. That's why, because some parliamentarians do not understand why do they need to fulfill the declaration of assets or declaration of interest. And what is actually the difference between the declaration of assets and the declaration of interest, right? If I fulfill the declaration of assets that I have 25 acres of land, can I vote in the parliament when they are introducing that bill? But if my wife have a share of Coca-Cola, am I allowed to vote on a bill that will give the right for Coca-Cola to build a... So that's why you need all that. That's why you need the training, and sorry for taking time.
Thank you, and you brought us to the next topic, undue influence, Mr. Basio Terracino. One of the threats to public integrity is undue influence exerted on the decision makers in the decision-making process or having monopoly of the influence. And this has proven to be even more the case in times when the governments have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought about unprecedented challenges of existing democracies, concentration of power, derogation of rights and freedoms, and large amounts of money being infused in the national economies to recover. In the aftermath of the pandemic, OECD issued a report, Lobbying in the 21st Century, Transparency, Integrity and Access, by which it noted that lobbying has been part of democracies for at least 2 centuries, and reaffirmed that it is a legitimate way to influence and inform governments. However, it carries risk of undue influence. And new evidence regularly emerges showing that the abuse of lobbying and other influence practices is blocking progress in many public policy areas. Studies increasingly show that lobbying and other influence practices conducted without transparency and integrity and without the involvement of a broad group of stakeholders has led to misallocation of public resources, reduced productivity and perpetuated social inequalities. So what are the key policy areas that governments should prioritize to effectively address undue influence and corruption in their public institutions?
Thank you. I'll start perhaps by saying that lobbying as we think it happens, it doesn't happen anymore. If we think of perhaps these movies, American, most of them, in which you have a man, usually with a briefcase, going to see a parliamentarian or talk or influence in that way, I think that's over. It doesn't happen like that. And that's why in our work we keep the word lobbying so everybody knows what we're talking about, but we added the word influence, which is much broader. And in this report that we produced, yes, I think already 2 years ago, one of the things is that the conclusion we reached was, okay, it's much more complex than it used to be. And we see, for example, the increased use of social media. So lobbying through or with social media as a lobbying tool, especially to shape policy debates, inform or persuade members of the public, to put pressure on policymakers. So this is something we didn't, I mean, we saw it before. Sometimes when we talk, I always think, well, this is marketing. It exists for a long time, in which companies had a marketing department to basically influence people to buy their products. So the same is now applied to influence people to put pressure on government. And this is activities that are, of course, not captured by lobbying regulations. We have many types of regulations. Some countries have adopted very, very strict and very narrow with definitions of lobbying, so it doesn't include any of the things I've mentioned. So, of course, there we have little transparency what's really happening. So we have, and many countries have nothing, actually. So 22 countries in the OECD have adopted some form of transparency mechanism through lobbying registries or open agendas or legislative footprint, but only Canada and the EU cover in their legal framework what we call lobbying through grassroots movements and social media campaigns when used as a lobbying tool. And and if you wonder, well, how is this useful? So if you did not were convinced before, something that it was interesting is in Canada when there was the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, it was in the only country that you could really see almost live who was influencing the different policies that the government was taking, because they have such a good lobbying system, which is updated regularly because it covers grassroots movements and social media. So if you look at the report, if you ever bored and have time, look at the report from the COVID time, and you will see that it's you could see this, and the media and the civil society used it a lot because it was almost live what you saw. So first, what we need is to cover these gaps, these loopholes in the regulations in countries, and understand influence in this broader way, also through financing and using think tanks and grassroots movements. So something that is perhaps in Europe happens a little bit, used to happen a little bit less, but now we see it a lot. and it was used for a long time in the United States, is companies that fund what we think are grassroots movements. So mothers for, an organization called Mothers for Better Milk and Babies. And actually behind you have a company that produces milk and funds this type of movement. So all this, there is a tendency to provide transparency around this, but much more is needed. The second point I would say is the issue of beneficial owners. So even if we have transparency on who is influencing policy-making processes, the name of a legal entity may not reveal who's really the beneficial owner. So there is a call for, when we talk about transparency of lobbying, also adding the beneficial ownership issue in this discussion. And the third, and I will be quick here because I already mentioned this, is the issue of foreign interests and countries. So I've already mentioned before the risks, and I think they're obvious, but we see it a lot. And actually very few countries have mechanisms to address this, such as maybe you know it, which is called the FARA, is the US Foreign Agents Registration Act, which requires a registration of persons and entities with an agency relationship with foreign governments who are engaged in influence activities inside the United States. There as well, you would think it's a registry. It has been quite successful. If you look, actually, all this information is online. You can look at the reports they produce, and actually they prosecute a lot of people based on this law and the registry. So it's of course, it doesn't cover everything, but it's, I would say, quite successful. And as you may know, the EU is now exploring creating a similar system for all European countries. And last point, other policy solutions would be strengthening the rules on the financing of political parties, the screening of investments, foreign investment, contracts, the purchase of technologies, the ownership of media, guidelines on protecting universities and civil society from foreign interference. So there's a lot of actions that need to be taken in order to provide more transparency and integrity in a way that foreign interests influence our policymaking.
Without mistaking real foreign agents with local civil society, because that's the risk that we are seeing with the draft regulation or recommendation on directive of the EU. So please don't go in the Russian style of political agencies regulation in Europe. I really hope that you don't go that way.
And you brought me to the next question to you, Ms. Ferreira-Rubio. Actually, what I wanted to say is that the TI has observed in its 2022 CPI that undue influence is a threat to Western Europe and the EU countries. And you announced at the beginning of this year, nearly a third of countries in the region hit historically low scores this year. And you referred to various scandals in various countries and the undue influence, also foreign influence that was found there, how politicians from other countries and private sector was able to influence the policies and policymakers. So can you share examples of successful anti-corruption initiatives or campaigns that have effectively countered undue influence in democracies?
There are plenty, because there are lots of things done in the positive side, as Julio mentioned in his speech. I would say that the use of integrity pacts, which is a tool that incorporates in every public procurement a third party that will raise the red flag if necessary, if the anti-corruption rules involved in the procurement are not complied with. So integrity pacts are being used in Europe. Many of our chapters have been involved, and they are successful. They were created, in fact, in Latin America in the 90s. to participate in public procurement where we have lots of corruption. And we managed to intervene in some of these cases with success. So that would be one tool. The other tool has to do with the use of new technologies, which we have already mentioned. So digitalization of information that facilitates access to information. The use of new technologies to manage the risk reports or to discover patterns of possible suspicious activity. For that, we have now tools not to delegate the decision-making to the tools. That's what I call the algocracy. We will end being government by algorithms, and that's a great, awful future, so we have to stop that. But use technology to discover these patterns of wrong activity that allows the Commission or the authority to put their lens there. The use of technology for digital contracting or open contracting, and also for beneficial ownership transparency. And the interoperability of the registers and the digitalized tools across country. Because it's not enough to compile all the asset declaration and interest declarations and put them together and say, yeah, complete, without verifying and without crossing the information. For instance, with the tax authorities, a public official that says, I am only receiving my salary. But then they are traveling around Marbella and buying Rolex for the wife in the best of the cases. and that has nothing to do with what they report to the Commission or to the tax authorities or what the anti-money laundering office in the country has discovered or is looking at suspicious activity. So let's make the registers interoperable. And of course, I would add that you have to also work with the private sector. Again, that's important. And in particular, in the private sector, what is the trend now has to do with ESG investment and ESG reporting, and with the movement that goes from regulatory compliance to integrity, integrated on in all functions of the corporate activity. So showing that integrity is good for business, for a balanced playing field, a level playing field in a country and beyond. So I think there are examples that show that we can be successful. It takes time. It needs for anti-corruption fighters, whether in the public sector, private sector, or in civil society, patience and perseverance. It's a long run.
Thank you. Mr. Schumi, what strategies can be employed to raise public awareness about the importance of public integrity and citizen participation in countering corruption?
We can find long-term strategies and as well short-term, but I will describe on short only the one we started in 2020 in cooperation with Slovenian National Education Institute. It's so-called Integrity Generations Common Goal. So we started it as a pilot project, and now after 3 years we can say that it's already prepared to put in place in school system on their own, of course. We just help them as partners. What's the most important message? Already we discussed about it, that we have to start with kids, so with pupils. We might not reach families maybe via media or maybe via our prevention activities in general. But we can go to the kindergarten, or maybe the system can put integrity at the right place already in kindergarten. Of course, not with definition of integrity. It's very hard to understand for kids. But it needs to be systematically delivered since the beginning. So kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools, and it's the most efficient prevention. But we cannot expect results overnight. So it takes not just years, it takes maybe 1-2 generations. But it's never too late, you have to start. So this is the most important long-term project. And as well, I can say the cooperation with not just media, private sector as well, but to cooperate with private sector is so-called it can be understood as a provocation on the one side. It's like a double-edged sword. So you can receive then complaints or approvals, on the other side criticism, and who do not understand that in fighting against corruption or prevention or preventing corruptions, we are all together. They can say that why do you need to cooperate with private sector, because they are one who offer bribes and so on. But I believe that we have to continue our work, because together we are stronger, and together, not just internationally, nationally, but as well internationally, we are even more efficient. But why? Not just because of feeling inside of the institutions, but because of the message we then give with such kind of event as today to decision makers as well. That it's not just Commission in Slovenia, but who's fighting or preventing corruption, but here's a whole system on board.
Thank you. Allow me to finish this discussion here. I think we have taken more time than we actually allocated to this panel. I thank you for this lively discussion. And I think we still have some time for questions from the audience. So I would like you, in case you have any question, if you could please tell your name and also whom you're posing the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Ana Kerševan. I'm the State Attorney General in Slovenia. First, compliments to the organizers and the CPC for this event. I think topics like this are never exhausted, and I wish more members of the executive branch would have been in the room with us today. I have a question, or maybe half comment for all of you or some of you. And namely, how important, in your view, is the legislative and systemic stability of independent institutions that safeguard public interest and that work towards preventing corruptive behavior, such as we've heard, it's the independent judiciary, it's the CPC, it's the prosecution, and in Slovenia also the State Attorney's Office, because we stand in the way of many private interests. And the tricky thing is that legislative process, in principle, it's a legal one, it's a democratic one, but it can be misused or even abused in a way that it creates a very unstable and confusing environment in which these independent institutions operate, and it can also exhaust them financially. So this also happened to the State Attorney's Office in Slovenia a few years ago. The law was changed quickly without any explanation. It tied us closely to the will of the executive branch, and a few years ago we were actually forced to file SLAPP suits. And we're now fighting towards legislative changes to change that, but the political will is not there. And I'm afraid the politicians are not aware of the link between the legislative framework and its stability and the corruptive risks this.
I think they are aware. Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
I'm afraid
why.
so. Yeah. Thank you. That's my question.
Maybe I'll just. I think you touched on two very big issues. One is the issue of the independence. So, and even your very early comment, I mostly work with governments, the executive, but also with entities like the Commission, fully independent, there are different degrees of independence. I think we will all agree you need both. You need the independent institutions, of course. They are part of the republic and the democracy. But as you said, if the others are not in the room, we are talking from outside, let's say. So I always say we must pierce this and go and work with, which I do regularly, is with the executive. If not, then little is achieved from outside, sort of from this very strong point of view of independence. So when you manage to break this, sort of the independence, but working with executive, that's the best result. But the second issue is the legislative power, which is, in my view, long overdue, working with them and on their own integrity. There's much less work done, at least from us. I know Greco has covered it, but one of the many rounds, we work much less with them, although trying, on the way their own integrity, their own anti-corruption, because we have the separation of powers. It's very difficult, but in some countries this was taken to an extreme that there's no control, there's no even basic standards on integrity and anti-corruption in the legislative power, which may lead to easy adoption of laws in one direction or in another. So for me, there is this need, very, very urgent, and we're working on this at the OECD, is to bring in the legislative power also into this discussion. So I was happy to see that we had here today a representative from them, so they are also aware and do their part as well.
Also, what Anna mentioned is very common around the world. You create the independent agency, and then you really stop them delivering by not giving the resources, as Robert mentioned, or not giving the proper authority to perform the work that it is supposed to be doing. So I will tell you an anecdote. Central America country. Many years ago, I went there not as Transparency International, but as a consultant working for an international organization in order to evaluate the anti-corruption public prosecutor office, independent. So I arrived, I asked for a meeting, and the answer was, yes, we can meet at the coffee shop in the shopping mall. Well, okay, it was morning, shopping mall, no risks, so I went. And we start talking. Imagine how many years ago there were no mobile phones. It was the other mobile phones, but with a cable there. So from time to time, we were talking, and someone from the coffee shop came and said, Mr. So-and-so, you have a telephone call. So, give the phone. This man answered. The third time, I say, why don't we go to your office? And the answer was, we can go if you want. It is in this building, upstairs. But I have no telephone, no secretariat, and no internet. So the owner of the coffee shop is so committed in the fight against corruption that he allows me to use the internet of the coffee to investigate corruption. So I work here, and the people help me. Do you think that having the law with all the rules was enough in that situation? No, but normally, not in the case of Greco evaluations, I know, you tend to be a checkbox list clicking exercise. So a law, yes. Independent authority, yes. Budget in the general budget, yes. And that's it. And it's not working in practice. So when we evaluate, we do the two things, the jure and de facto evaluation. And the gap, I can assure you, is amazing. So we have to put that in the highlights and to work to bridge the gap between what the law says and the practice of anti-corruption.
Thank you. Maroš Paulini, Slovakia Civil Service Council. My question is about the cooperation and the relations toward, I would say, another group of actors who are also in the business of evaluating state capacity to keep on their promise. And the group of actors are financial markets and rating agencies who also evaluate the capacity of democracy and the rule of law. And from history, we know that it was money who made Charles I in England convene the first parliament, and also in France, French Revolution, the dire need of money. So my question would be how to harmonize our standards with the financial market and the rating agencies so that our findings and the opinion of our experts holds an additional sway on the governments. Thank you. The question is to whoever is up to it.
The first answer would be talk with them. You have to be in contact. And that's what, for instance, we are doing at the World Economic Forum Anti-Corruption Group or Initiative, the PACI team, working with or working on ESG reporting and rating agencies and investors to help us in the fight against corruption in terms of not only combining the expectations and what they are measuring, but also working together in the solutions. Because this measuring trend or this reporting is trying to drown companies because there are so many different things to report that instead of working for integrity, many companies should work for reporting. So they have become a reporting agency, in fact, answering to 1, 2, 3, 4 different investors, agencies, tax, etc. So the first thing is, let's work together, let's hear and coordinate. The only way in which we will succeed in the fight against corruption is coordination and cooperation. It's collective action. And collective action is not just a narrative or a politically correct word. It is more than a word. It is the commitment to work together and the capacity not to have prejudice against other actors. Of course, I accept the criminal actors, but with the other actors in society, we have to talk and to hear and to listen, because sometimes we go into this dialogue or cooperation, but with closed ears. So we have the meetings, everybody says what they wanted to say, and then the ones who have the power to make the decisions go their way without listening. So we have to listen, and this goes also for the invitation to civil society to participate or citizens to participate. It's not just opening a website where you can express your opinions on a draft law. I don't know whether you have this kind of mechanism here. But if nobody reads what the people is saying, and nobody analyzed the possibility to introduce that, which is listening to the other one, it will be very difficult to go in collective action.
And then, thank you. Actually, I mean, I've heard this before. Maybe it was you, Maroš, that mentioned it. But the rating agencies and financial markets, I think it's a great. I will look into it. I've heard it before, and I think it's time to do it correctly. My only concern is what is the standard that they use to measure, evaluate these things. And then we all work in this field, so we know that's very difficult. But we are, with you, which you also know, if with the OECD public integrity indicators, we are starting to do that, and actually they are now going, as of this month, we start working with 70 countries in the world, so we're really going beyond the OECD countries with an attempt to have some uniform data now across the world, I would say, which is similar, not exactly the same as a rating agency, but I think it's a good idea to explore. I think you're right about that. There could be a really good incentive.
We do have one question from our online audience, and it is intended for Mr. Schumi. It goes, what kind of incentives could be set for our leaders to play by the rules, being compliant, high integrity, code of ethics, and so on? Now, very local reference. If we recall our last scandal at Ministry for Work and Mrs. Ajanović-Honig, our Ministry for Interior Affairs, I apologize for public office not resigning since she thinks she did everything right. Although, on the other hand, we, the citizens, ask ourselves what for 10 million will do good to our lives. We have new additional taxes on our income, no doctors on primary level, and so on and so on.
Unfortunately, I cannot comment open cases we have in front of our commission. But generally speaking, I can say that, first of all, we would like to have adults in brackets in the political environment. So it means that they can recognize the level of responsibility, accountability, and that they understand what does integrity stands for, that it's not just a political message which is very appropriate in front in the period of election, but when you do your job, you have to be responsible. And when you are responsible person with integrity, you know when you do mistake. When you do mistake, you have to apologize, or you have to leave the post. So it's the best prevention mechanism, but it goes top to down. So it goes with the form of leading by example. So everyone looks up to his own or her own leader, how he behaves, and so on. So what's important is what culture is present in society. We do our best. I believe that our mission is important, that what we do on with recommendations, with principal opinions, with education, with whatever we do, we are the messengers in society, that integrity, trust, responsibility, accountability are very important.
Thank you for this conference. It's really have impact, and I heard a lot of things which I didn't know before. But I have a concrete question for President Dr. Schumi. I would like to ask, do we have any prevention how we will stop nepotism in the public sector? Thank you.
Do you mean in Slovenia or in general? In Slovenia. How much time do we have?
Maybe you can have a new conference on this topic.
On nepotism.
Yes.
It's very hard. It's very hard to explain Slovenian culture because there is excuse present in daily debate that we know each other very well, that we are a small country, that we cannot avoid conflict of interest, and so on and so on. But at the Commission, we do not believe in these excuses. So we believe that you are grown enough, that you know what does society expects from you when you are at the position, when you are, for example, just public employee, not need to be at the top of the chain. You need to behave, first of all, that you serve to society, not to your own benefit. So it means that what we need to learn at the beginning is that we have to separate as public servants private benefits from public good, so that this conflict of interest isn't present day by day, that our common goal, our, for example, social responsible approach, that we need to go out of ourselves, that we need to take care for others is at the first place. Maybe with such kind of approach, with education, with raising awarenesses, that we have only one state, only one public sector, that private interest is of course important, but not, you cannot mix it while you're working, while you're doing your job. So it's very hard to answer on short.
Hello, yes. No more technical problems. I will have to stop all of you here, also the audience. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for joining us here. Thank you for answering questions. I had some at hand still, but maybe next time.